Hi everyone, this is Rdc with the Nato Research Foundation. We're just going to wait another minute to see if anyone else logs in, and then we'll begin. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending part of your Thursday with us today. My name is Rdc. I am a Senior Program Manager at the Nato Research Foundation. We're delighted that you've joined us today to learn how a group of committed, caring, and passionate members of St. James, Minnesota chose to embrace the changing demographic population in their small town as an opportunity instead of a problem. In the process of getting to know one another's stories and working on projects designed to recognize and celebrate the diverse cultural heritage of the town's residents, trusting relationships formed that have built bridges between diverse community members, creating a more welcoming community for all. The webinar will also share how NATO member Region 9 Development Commission in Mankato, Minnesota has supported this work, provided resources, and encouraged partnerships, and built internal capacity regarding intercultural awareness and equity. Today's webinar is brought to you, is sponsored by the NATO Research Foundation and the New Growth Innovation Network, also known as ENGINE, and is brought to you by a project called the Inclusive Development and Economic Development District's COVID-19 Recovery, which is funded by the Economic Development Administration. A little more information about our organizations. The NATO Research Foundation is the nonprofit research arm of the National Association of Development Organizations, which represents regional planning organizations, councils of government, and economic development districts across the country, largely in smaller metro areas and rural parts of the country. We're honored to be part of this project and to further ENGINE's work and our partnership with them. A little bit about ENGINE. They are the New Growth Innovation Network, and as part of this project have selected 6 economic development organizations to receive technical assistance to embed inclusive and equitable growth strategies into their COVID-19 recovery strategies and their comprehensive economic development strategies, or their CEDS. And they've also launched the Inclusive Recovery Initiative Community of Practice, which has brought together over 100 economic development organizations to discuss strategies around inclusive economic growth. I would expect some of our attendees today are part of that community of practice. And these attendees attend convenings and engage in peer-to-peer sessions to support efforts to embed inclusion and equity in economic development practice. So this webinar is part of NATO's efforts to further the discussion around equity and community while sharing the story of one small town in rural Minnesota. So I just want to share some logistics about today's webinar. You can submit questions or comments via the questions box in your screen and the right on the drop-down menu. A recording of the webinar will be made available soon at nato.org, and we'll also be sending out an email to all registrants with that information. We'd like to ask that you take a moment to complete the post-webinar survey, which will automatically be prompted to provide helpful feedback to us. And as always, please feel free to reach out with any questions to me. And my contact information is also on the website and will be posted with the webinar. So our goal is to leave approximately 10 minutes at the webinar ends for question and answers. So I'm really honored to have a wonderful team from Minnesota on the webinar with me today. It includes the following 4 people. So Nicole Griensewic, who is the Executive Director of the Region 9 Development Commission, Alejandra Bejarano, Economic Recovery Planner, also at the Region 9 Development Commission, Pat Branstad, who is a facilitators for the Uniting Cultures group in St. James, Minnesota, and Sue Harris, who is a community education director also in St. James, Minnesota. So without further ado, I will welcome Nicole to join, and we'll continue with the rest of our panelists. Thanks so much again for joining us.
All right, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and to be able to share Region 9's story and kind of quickly tell you how some of this began. In about 2013 to 2015, a lot of conversations we were having were talking about the equity gap and what were we going to do about it? And some of the commissioners really said, we need to get involved. What are we going to do? There's racism, but really with the equity gap, et cetera, we need to make some movement on this. And so often as an economic development district, we're kind of thrown into these brand new topics. Like a few years ago was childcare. What role does an economic development district play? And more importantly, where do we start and with whom to try to help make some, progress in these areas? And so St. James has just been a great example of some of the work that we're doing, and hopefully can share some best practices for other economic development districts and to kind of spur some ideas how to help do more welcoming community work, as it all ties in and is economic development. So with that, I want to save the most time. I'm going to pass it over to the speakers here today, so they have the majority of the time. But thank you again. We're so excited to be here and to be part of NATO. Region 9 has always enjoyed a lot of value in being an active member of NATO and having the opportunity to represent the Midwest on the board of directors. So without further ado, I want to introduce the St. James group. So I will pass it over.
All right, so I'm gonna start us off. Thank you, Kiara, and thank you, Nicole. And thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Embracing Change and Strengthening Communities in Rural America. So like Kiara was saying, I'm Alejandra and I work with Region 9 Development Commission. And to start us off here today, I'm gonna be sharing a little bit more about our organization and some initiatives that have been taking place in our communities. And then I'm gonna pass it off to Sue and Pat, who will be sharing more about their work in St. James. So like I mentioned, I work for an RDO, or a regional development organization. And as you can see in the screen or on the map, there are different RDOs throughout the state and throughout the nation. We were established by Minnesota statute to provide technical assistance to local units of government in the region, and we provide a variety of services based on the unique needs of the region. So as you can see in the map, different RDOs will provide different services based on the needs of the region. So the RDO in Duluth might have different programming than the one in Slayton and the one in Fergus Falls. We also partner with different state, federal, and local entities to administer and obtain grants. And we are governed by a volunteer commission that is composed of elected officials, business owners, and community leaders, among others. And we can go to the next slide. We serve the South Central Minnesota region, which includes the counties listed on the screen, for a total of 72 cities, 147 townships, and 33 school districts. And yep, we can move on. So now that we've learned a little bit more about how we came to be, I want to share with all of you a little bit more about some labor trends from our region. And I know it's really fun and interesting topic right after lunch, so bear with me. So at RNDC, not long ago, we were looking at employment trends and labor data from the region to better understand the current state of the workforce. And when looking at these employment patterns that we came across, it was revealed that there is higher seasonality and turnover among workers of color compared to other workers. These workers were also underrepresented in the industries listed on the screen, which include finance, management of companies, professional, scientific, and technical services, education, arts, and public administration, among others. And some of the higher paying jobs in our region are found within these industries, where workers of color represent a smaller share of the labor force than their share of the population. And we can go to the next one. So beyond that, we also looked at data from Brooklyns that showed that a large percentage of diverse workers have low-wage jobs and which often lack job security. And when we talk about diverse workers, we're not only talking about race and gender. It also includes aspects such as socioeconomic status, education level, physical ability, mental ability, and so on. So you may be thinking, well, these aren't really news. This is a reality that we know of and that is common to a lot of communities in our nation. So why is it such a big issue? And the issue with this is that according to Brooklyns, low-wage work can be sticky, which basically means that the longer a worker spends in a low-wage industry, the smaller their chances of moving up. In fact, according to them, every 4 years, the probability of leaving low-wage work shrinks by half. And this is why some sections of the labor market are like sandpits, where the longer a worker remains, the smaller their chances of upward mobility. And like I already mentioned, there are different aspects such as race and gender that also impact that upward mobility. It can hold workers back. And it is only going to get more challenging for workers since traditional pathways from low wage to high wage work are expected to disappear in the next few years. So this is why, from an economic development perspective, it is very important for us to support and upskill the labor force in our region, and also to uplift them from a community standpoint, like Sue and Pat are about to explain. We see this as a joint and collaborative effort from both a community and economic development perspective. Again, why is this so critical? Because we are dealing with unprecedented labor shortages. Here I have a graph from real-time talent that I always like to share because I think it's very eye-opening and I like to highlight when talking about labor shortages and discussing the need for upskilling our workforce. So this graph here shows the forecasted labor shortages in the state for the next 4 years. And as you can see, the gray area represents all the workers that we currently have and expect to have up until 2025. And the green area represents all the workers that we will need to meet our economic development needs and our economic growth. So as you can see, every year that gap keeps growing and growing. And this is what that graph could look like if we take intentional steps, such as supporting dislocated workers, eliminating disparities in unemployment, upskilling low-income workers, and supporting non-traditional workers. If we take these steps, we can reduce the labor shortage by almost 100,000 workers. So what can an RDC do? If you work at one or if you know of an RDO and you want to work with one, there are a lot of resources that they can provide and initiatives that they can put in place to combat some of these shortages and employment issues. Like Nicole mentioned, there has been a lot of initiatives that have been implemented at RNDC. And here on the screen, I have a timeline of some of the equity efforts that have been taking place in our region and how it's kind of snowballed in the last few years. So first, in 2017, we partnered with the YWCA to launch the It's Time to Talk Forum on Race, which is a YWCA trademark program through which diverse leaders from business, education, arts, and community services come together to have small table discussions around race. Then in 2018, RNDC launched a Rural Equity Learning Community Cohort, or also called RELC, through this program, stakeholders and community members shared, examined, and explored inclusive best practices through education and relationship building to build capacity for local action. And Sue and Pat here in just a few minutes are going to be talking more about this project. Then in 2019, similar to RELC, the Welcoming Communities project was launched, which centered on providing tools and skills and allowed participants to build relations and networks in their communities so that they can take action. So very similar to what RELC was like. Then that same year, we launched the very first Equity Summit, followed by in 2020, the Welcoming Communities design team received grants that allowed them to distribute funds to local food shelves. And then that same year, we launched the second Equity Summit that had to take place virtually due to the pandemic, but there was a great turnout and it was just as successful as the first one. And then in 2021, through ripple effect mapping, all these initiatives were documented and their impact was evaluated. And then finally, that takes us up to 2022. So currently this year, our NDC is working on developing a rural and equity inclusion plan. And here on the left, I have a few examples of some of the partners that we have worked with throughout all of these initiatives and who have been part of these efforts. And I want to acknowledge that these partners will look different in every community, and they will vary and change based on the unique challenges and needs that each region faces. So what else can RDCs do beyond supporting and developing initiatives and programmings like the ones I just described? There are other steps that RDCs can take to become catalysts for equity. And one of those is offering resources. If there are community partners, community leaders who want to partake on this work, RDOs can provide resources such as technical assistance, grant writing, community development expertise, funding sources at the regional, state, federal, and local level that community groups may not know of unless we share those with them. We can also provide connections and networks through the partnerships that we have with foundations, nonprofits, experts, and community liaisons. And then finally, we can also share our training and mentorship and strategic planning skills. So what are other steps that we have taken and we've seen other RDOs around the state take? Those include working on internal training and research to build internal capacity. There are a lot of resources out there. There are toolkits, there are consultants, assessments that you and your staff can take. And also beyond that, there are a lot of external resources, like I'm about to share in my next slide, from Nato, like Kiara already mentioned, from the International Economic Development Council. And all of these are free of use, so I do recommend you visit them. And other steps that I recommend you do as well is look at what others are doing, what other organizations are doing, what steps are they taking, what programming are they putting on, and maybe reaching out to them and learning from them and figuring out how you can collaborate and work together so that you can implement some of these projects in your own organization. It is also very crucial to get staff buy-in and commitment. It is key that everyone is on board with this type of work. If not, projects like this are not going to move forward. Also reviewing and updating internal policies and looking at the makeup of your commission, of your board, to make sure that you're getting broad input. And these are not all inclusive. These are just steps that we have taken and others have taken, but could be good starting points for either of you who may be interested in doing some of this work. So like I mentioned, there are a lot of great resources out there, and Kiara just touched on some of these. Nato has great resources that we encourage everyone to look at. They talked about the New Growth Innovation Network. They have a page that is dedicated to equity and inclusion resources for RDOs. The Policy Link and the International Economic Development Council also have a lot of courses and IDI assessments that are pretty useful. And the Economic Inclusion, the Center for Economic Inclusion, also has a great list of resources. And we actually compiled a list that we're going to be sharing with you that includes all of these resources that I'm touching on right here, so that you have, once the webinar is over, you can go and check it out and see if there are any resources that you may be interested on. So before I pass it off to Pat and Sue, I want to finish up with this graphic that I really like, and I think it does a really good job at picturing and describing what communities are trying to accomplish and how they can help and how we can help them. In this graphic up here, you can see how communities a lot of times are in the boat, trying to get to that island to accomplish those goals they want to accomplish, and maybe that vision that they've set up for their community. And as RDOs, we're part of the wind, where that catalyst that is helping that community reach those goals and visions that they've set up for themselves. So we're not precisely on the boat with them doing the groundwork, or maybe that rowing in this case, but we're actually helping them move forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sue.
Sue, we can't hear you.
My name is Sue Harris, and I have the pleasure this afternoon of introducing to you our small rural community in South Central Minnesota. And I've lived in St. James for 40 years. And if anyone is from a small rural community, I was not born and raised there, but I came there as a young bride. And so I'm not really from St. James. I'm still a new immigrant, new person. In our small community, we're rural. We are a railroad town and established, and so our town celebration is called Railroad Days. They're a very small community, a small county, and food processing and agriculture are our main industries. And the food processing is what has caused this economic development issue for us of labor shortages. Just as Ali was indicating, in our town, we had labor shortages for our food processing industry. And that issue alone has changed the demographics of our community forever. And we had 2 food processing plants who one of them went to Southern Texas and took a bus and brought young man labor to work in our food processing industry. We had the young man, and then we ended up with families coming. And then we had migrant status as people in Minnesota sugar beets, and then finding a stable force and a stable population living in our community. To the point we are right now that in community, we're almost 38–40% Latinx, and in our schools, well over 50%. We also live in a small rural, and so we all have over 50% free and reduced lunch. In our neighboring school districts, it's over 80% free and reduced lunch. So we're rural, we're low income, and we've had a huge demographic switch over the last 40 years. So as you can imagine, being small, rural, and virtually all white, and living in a conservative area of our state, to have this demographic switch of people coming from Mexico first, then adding in El Salvador, and then most recently Guatemala, and bringing Spanish into our community, and how we work with that and have resources, healthcare, access to resources with Spanish. And then this new population of Guatemalans now speak indigenous languages of Mamiquiche, which is not Spanish. So all of that has put a strain and a change on our small community. So if you could turn the slide. We've lived together in St. James kind of in parallel universes. We have our Latinx community and our white community, and they're overlapping oftentimes with our kids at school. And so in the late 90s, our community recognizes that our community was changing. And so our community business and leadership decided to bring in a community project where we took 100 people to a neighboring town to process through what are the issues in St. James. And of course, one of them was the diversity. So there was a committee that was formed called Unidad, and that group was a group of white folks that wanted to impact and be welcoming to the Latinx community. The problem was we didn't have representation from our Latinx community, nor any connection or buy-in. It was a group of our business community wanting to figure out how to do things, but not necessarily having the connections to do such. But if you don't know, you have to start. So it was a start. If we jettison forward then the mid-2000s, there was a project from Bush Foundation and the Northwest Area Foundation called Rural Horizons Poverty Reduction. And that was a pivotal point in our community as we have the Spirit of St. James. Now we've got this new effort, and that was the biggest piece was Leadership Plenty. And that was done with a Spanish-speaking group and an English-speaking group. And the cool thing was giving leadership ideas, suggestions, and processes to our Spanish-speaking population. That bore great fruit because in the ensuing years, we saw people coming out of that were willing to run for our school board. And we had high school students participate in the project. One of the high school students now is working with the ACLU in our state and is very influential in supporting our Latinx community in St. James. So then Region 9 in 2017 called up and said, Community Ed, would you like to offer a forum on race? Well, we did. So we had the forum on race. Then we had, coming out of Leadership Plenty, some of the folks there creating the Convivencia Hispana, which is a Latinx leadership project that helped to develop at first. The first goal was to give scholarship dollars for students to go on to post-secondary. And then we hit the presidential election, and all that happened with all of that, that forced this community to really look at next steps. Can you turn the slide? And our next piece was this, it's time to talk forum on race. So one of our key takeaways is, how do you engage your entire community? Well, we, in our small community, and you can see these are pictures, there was over 80 people that came. The coolest part, a good chunk of them were our Latinx community and some people that only spoke Spanish. We finally sat down together to talk about, what does this mean and where do we go from here? So the engagement of this whole community and making sure, rather than last time it was just the white community, that it was all people were brought together to discuss important topics. This was a catalyst. Can flip the slide. So we had our joint meeting, we had our forum on race, and then we passed around anyone that what do you want to do? Do people want to do something extra more? Who is that? We invited all of those folks back to the table to help develop a plan. And in August 2017, a couple months following the forum, Uniting Cultures was born. We had a past history of other efforts community-wide. There was a new effort, and it was kind of a catalytic with many things coming together at the same time. The community was ready for action. We decided that together we need to do everything, Spanish and English, and be inclusive in the establishment of the plan and everything that was coming out of that plan. Next slide, please. This led to a lot of ripple effects throughout the entire community. Our school, shortly thereafter, developed an equity team with the staff. Since that time, a Teachers of Color grant has been written, and our community now has $700,000 to help pay tuition for our high school students to go on to become teachers and come back and teach in our communities. The school has developed staff development. A good chunk of the staff took the IDI, and we've had small staff development with small groups as well as full staff development in our public schools. Our students formed a social justice club. The school is making equity a part of their strategic planning process, and the school is and has been the fiscal host for Uniting Cultures grant writing and for our companion Convivencia Hispana, our Latinx group. Next slide, please. One of the projects that I wanted to share, because it is special to my heart, is that our students led Black Lives Matter rally in our small town. And as you can see in your lower right-hand corner, the Minnesota Teacher of the Year candidates were traveling the state and were invited, and they were spokespeople at our Black Lives rally that evening. And it was very exciting that it was led and organized by our high school students, and that we had representation and discussion that evening in a public forum with the Teachers of the Year candidates about the importance of equity. Next slide, please. Our local Rotary Club, which I am a member of, took on a white fragility as a monthly discussion. And I will tell you that all of these efforts don't come easily sometimes and come with some pushback. We actually lost a member of our Rotary Club because we were having these discussions. We as a group hosted our own after the other equity summits that we attended that Region 9 spoke about earlier. We decided we wanted to do one locally, And we had a tremendous amount of local business support to be able to put that summit on. Also, it's bled off into our churches that have been activists and having study groups. Next slide, please. Region 9 mentioned the food insecurity, and our community hosts and has been active in backpack program, a high school food pantry. We now have a family food giveaway in each of our 3 schools. You can drive by and get a 9x13 pan. We're one of the first rural places in the state outside of our metro area to do that. And there's a strong support that the United Cultures group has done throughout all of COVID and to this date for our food shelf. Our city has worked on bilingual publications and signage. There's been support for the Equity Summit, our Latinx businesses and entrepreneurs training, handyman certifications. And then next slide, please. Our Convivencia Hispana, of which I'm so very proud of, has developed our Golden Age, which is a project that supports their senior citizens. And we've had many other partnership groups that have worked together to provide activities, food support for senior citizens that do not speak English that are Latinx. We developed a new plaza in town. It was donated by, the land was donated. It was a blank piece of ground. And it was very much led by our Convivencia Hispana, what that was going to look like and how they were going to develop this new plaza in town. And I'm very proud to say that our Convivencia Hispana has been the recipient of $20,000 grants to be able to work with COVID outreach and support for the Latinx community. They have raised scholarship dollars for students and been very instrumental in bringing forward new efforts in our town. And then my last slide for my part of this is the success story of what has gone in the past and how that has and can and will, I believe, affect in the future. Our story is that Laura Mavarchian, who you can see in the very low center, she's got dark hair and glasses. She and her family came as undocumented folks to our community to work in the food processing industry. Our community at that point, they were one of the first people to come to town. And there was a support network that provided her and her family support to the point that she felt that she was living a Norman Rockwell, in her words, existence in St. James. She has gone on and is successful and is living in Atlanta, Georgia. And so her upbringing in St. James and the support for undocumented folks in our community that do not speak English, and the community itself, the wraparound, in her thanks and appreciation, she commissioned an undocumented artist from Atlanta and paid over $40,000 to place this mural in our community as a tribute to her parents who immigrated and provided her with the ability to even be able to do this. And they are at the very top in the center group. The very top people are her uncles and her parents. To the left are the teachers and the people that impacted on the top part of the lower left, a group of people. They are the teachers that had her in track and in music, the teacher that helped her family learn English. And on the right-hand side of the grouping is at the very top are people that were instrumental in helping her family. Outreach worker, her first job and working at a restaurant. And then the lower tier of people are the people that are kind of currently working in our community on those particular issues. Lining the very bottom, all across the bottom, are a lot of students and a lot of things that you pull together for community. But she gave this tribute to our community, and it was unveiled this past summer. And it means a great deal to our community to honor the people, our Hispanic individuals, to have that prominent at the center of our town. And the most, I think the most meaningful and important piece of all of this is Laura gained her US citizenship just a few short weeks after we dedicated our mural. So together as a community, you can make a difference. I'd like to pass it on to Pat.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Sue. Sue gave you some good background on the efforts that led to the creation of Uniting Cultures. You'll see on the screen in front of you right now the mission statement that we arrived at as we started doing our work together in 2017. We started with 4 main goals: to celebrate the cultural and ethnic diversity in St. James, to get to know one another, to get to know one another's story, to educate ourselves and others in the community about the diverse cultural heritage of our community. And we also hope to facilitate community dialogue with local law enforcement. And those were pretty lofty goals. We didn't know what we didn't know, but we got started. And as we got going, more and more ideas surfaced. And I'll tell you a little bit about our initial goals that we did, how we got started, what we did, and why. We'll talk about a little bit about the successes and challenges that we've experienced as a community group, and hopefully be able to share through our experience some ideas that you might be able to apply. This is unique to St. James, but there are some things there that will help. On the screen in front of you, you'll see efforts in the past 4 years. If you remember, we had those basic 4 goals, but as we got going, there was more and more that developed. Besides the education and celebration of cultural and ethnic diversity, we were intentional about building bridges through trusting relationships. Sue already mentioned Convivencia Hispana, and it has become a mutually supportive effort. And then we were challenged to move into more than just celebration of and recognition of our cultural diversity, but we were challenged to look at doing some equity work. Along with that, as an organization, we went through some organizational development with practicing and learning intercultural competency, dealing with the issues of sustainability, and building capacity for increasing social capital. As we go to the next slide, you'll see pictures of our signature event, our Multicultural Fiesta. It was our first big project, and it has really become the signature event of our organization. It features an entertainment program with ethnic performing groups. We've had Mexican folk dancers, Swedish fiddlers, Aztec dancers, Scottish bagpipers, German folk characters, and Native American dancers, storyteller. We also have information vendors, and including community resources and kids activities as well, and then also a map for individuals to mark their ancestors' country of origin. Attendance at the fiesta has increased each year. We started with 400 people the first year, 700 in the second year, and over 1,000 in the third year. On the next slide, you'll see some of the ethnic foods that we have, that we offered. Some are for sampling and some are for sale. And those are favorite features of the event: Salvadoran pupusas, German pretzels, Norwegian lefse, Asian egg rolls, various types of tamales. There was an older couple at our first fiesta who was watching these ladies make some Norwegian lefse, and he was looking at it and he looked at me and he said, are they making tortillas? And I remember saying, well, they look a lot like tortillas, but they'll taste a little different. You'll have to try the sample. And they stayed around to wait for the sample and had the biggest smile on their face, kind of like, oh, I think I might need to try this. The quote on the screen is one of the most important things about our fiesta: learning about other cultures and sharing that with our children. As one of our members said, one of the beautiful things for people is to show their kids and their grandkids where they came from. We don't want our ancestors and the stories of our ancestors to die. On the next page, on the next slide, I'm sorry, you'll see another very important quote. You know, as we sat back and looked at the fiesta, we often fall back into old habits of gauging success of the fiesta by what the weather was like, how long it took to set up and clean up, what problems we encountered, and all of those things. But we've been reminded that the important part of this is to have recognition of our Latino friends and neighbors as part of the community and bringing people together in a center spot in the community. Instead of just looking at growing attendance, we have to remember that the success is what Julieta said here. Before these events, we felt excluded, and now we can say we feel included. All right, we can go to the next slide. To continue our work with education and celebration of cultural diversity, I'm sorry if I'm not sure I'm getting a message that my internet connection isn't real good, so I hope that you're hearing me yet. Following our fiesta, we decided we wanted to continue this work, and so we planned 4 Culture Through Cuisine events for more intentional sharing of cultural traditions. And this brought people together to make food and eat food together and share artifacts and stories of their immigration experience. On the next slide, you can see that we have the 4 cultures that we featured in this first year were Salvadoran, Mexican, Guatemalan, and Scandinavian. As we shared those stories, we realized that we wanted more opportunities to share people's stories, to get the word out, help people understand who our neighbors are and what the stories are. On the next slide, you'll see an effort that we produced called Community Conversations. This invited the public to come and hear stories about current immigration experiences, the path to citizenship, issues of DACA. We didn't have as many people attending as we had hoped, and so we wanted to think about other ways of bringing those stories out. And on the next slide, you'll see what became a really big project and one that we were very proud of. We were able to create a book called Your Story, My Story, Our Story. It featured immigration stories of 42 people, 39 different accounts, where people shared some traditions. They shared their path to citizenship, if that was part of it. They shared reasons that they had emigrated from their home country. And we put this together in a hardbound book that we distributed 750 copies through the community to help people get to know one another. On the next slide, you can see some of the benefits of this. As community members were reading this and understanding, recognizing that there are some common threads, and also realizing that learning a story of someone, learning someone's history puts a face on the word immigrant. We also learned that each story is unique. There isn't just one immigration story. On the next slide, you'll see a very important quote about from one of the people who shared their story. So the success wasn't only in people learning about one another's stories, but also about empowering those in our community to share their story. We've shared our story, and now I feel a part of you. On the next page, or next slide, excuse me, this sentiment is expressed again. When I first got here, I felt as a little grain of sand. No one really gave importance to myself or my culture. And she goes on to say, now I feel a part of you. And that's one of the key takeaways from our story project. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Besides doing these projects, Alejandra mentioned the Rural Equity Learning Community. That gave us a framework for learning how to operate in a multicultural context and how to build some capacity within the community, inviting people from other sectors to be part of our work and also supporting other community organizations who are doing similar type work. On the next slide, we can see a little bit about the multicultural context that we learned to work with. Of course, language was an issue. We learned that there are decision-making norms that are different between cultures. And so we needed to, first of all, be aware of those and then learn how to work with those in our meeting context. On the next slide, I also talked about the building capacity to increase social capital, expanding our own stakeholder base by being intentional in inviting people from different organizations to be part of our group and or keeping them on our email notification, and then supporting other community organizations as well. We can't do everything, but we can support others in the community, and in return, they support us. On the next slide, you'll see mention of the Confluencia as well, Confluencia Hispana, Sue had already talked about. We have provided them scholarship support, mentoring, and organizational support, but have also gained from them by our participation with the Golden Age and in helping with the educational programs like the Day of the Dead. I also mentioned that equity work was something that we were challenged to address. On the next slide, we can see some of the initiatives that we undertook to do some equity work. We had Working Out Loud circles, Becoming Anti-Racist, which were community conversation groups where individuals set their own learning goal and then gather together in small groups to share their learning and to hear from others in their group. We offered EDI or facilitated EDI programming through community education. The Equity Summit Sue mentioned was a 2-day virtual summit with speakers and breakout sessions dealing with any number of issues with equity. And we also established a social justice scholarship. Okay, the next slide, please. The challenges that we've had, I've alluded to already. Obviously, the cultural differences and working in a multicultural context, much of it is just awareness and learning, oh, wow, that's something we need to talk about. Financial resources, we are not a 501c3, and so we are totally dependent on contributions, donations, and grant support. Focus and prioritization. As we did more, we had more and more ideas, and we had to kind of put on the brakes and say, hey, let's settle down here a little bit and figure out what is our focus. And we worked on fine-tuning our vision and mission statement to use to help us prioritize the ideas that we had. Sustainability of a volunteer organization is always an issue. People get tired, people move on, and interest levels change, or interest areas change. And so we've had to, that has been a challenge for us. Sue also mentioned social capital loss. Sometimes this work is hard, and sometimes people don't want to hear about equity, don't want to address the changing demographics. And there is sometimes pushback within the community. That said, we also have had some great successes. And on the next slide, we can take a peek at those. We have become recognized as leaders in equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. It's a little intimidating because in doing this work, we know that there's so much we don't know, but we have been called on to share what we have learned. We have developed trusting relationships and true friendships with by building bridges in our community, and we have allowed or helped create a sense of belonging in community by people who haven't felt that they belonged. As Marta said here in this quote, for the first time in 25 years, we feel included in this community. And to feel included is the ability to contribute. That's what builds community. And Sue also mentioned the various ripple effects that have happened and are continuing to happen. And the last slide, if we could just take a look at that. Just to summarize a little bit, how did we get here? And there are things that make our situation unique in St. James, but there are some things that can be applied in other situations. One is just do it, just get started. You don't have to wait until you have all the answers and a perfect plan. And you build on past initiatives. Engaging community stakeholders, you need to identify, invite, listen, ask, and engage. Recognize that everybody has a different cultural lens, and then make a plan. And building trusting relationships, recognize the community leadership. Know who the leaders are in the community and who the gatekeepers are. Know that there is leadership change that happens. Work on creating, making new connections, renewing connections, nurturing them so that you can build some trusting friendships. So with that, we can flip to the last screen, I think, has a link of some resources, and these will be mailed out to you. And now if everyone else will join me, we have about a little over 10 minutes for questions. Kiara, how's that?
That's perfect, Pat. Thank you so much. I'd ask all the other panelists if you have a second to turn on your webcam and your microphone. If any attendees have questions, you can feel free to put them in the question box. I will stop sharing the screen just so we can more easily see everyone. But like Pat mentioned, this slideshow and the online Google Doc that was referred to will all be sent out to you in an email, so you'll have quick access to all of that. Okay, so I'm gonna see if we have some questions coming in. And in the meantime, I had some for your group. I guess one would be for maybe Alejandra and Nicole. You know, obviously every economic development organization or regional organization has a lot of competing priorities. So, you know, as an organization, if another organization, say, you know, has made a focus to on equity and inclusion and is interested in assessing their practices, you know, did you feel like it was more important to think about administrative policies and internal work, which I know you mentioned, or kind of programming for an external audience? Or were those just competing priorities?
And just to clarify, Kira, the question is like, how do we prioritize maybe like doing internal work, maybe doing more so external and implementing programs and initiatives?
Yeah, and generally, and how have you kind of approached those, or have you felt like you've maybe had the resources to do both? And I know that some of the funding streams may dictate what some of the work looks like as well.
Yeah, I can say maybe from my experience in the years I've been with Region 9, I would say that a lot of the programming comes with like funds we get and like opportunities to work with other partners. So if the opportunity arises, then that's when we implement programming. And then the internal piece, I guess, when conversations happens, when we're working on hiring, when people come on board, that maybe ignite some of those conversations. I would say like the internal policies, it's more like when it happens and then we bring staff on board and we start having those conversations and we're like, hey, maybe should we look at this? What are our policies looking like? So yeah, I would say maybe I can default to Nicole, maybe talking about more the priority. Yeah, like how do we prioritize?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And I wanted to ensure I was understanding the question. So for one example, I will share a kind of a more of an organizational level is that what we've been doing lately with hiring is we were even having the conversation in the interviews where at the end of each of the interviews, I'll tell the candidates, you know, we pride ourselves on having a really diverse team that comes with different, you know, strengths, opportunities, and weaknesses, but it makes sure that cultural understanding and knowing that anyone who's going to come on board, even for our team, I want to make sure they understand that it's something we take a lot of pride in to make sure that we're not just practicing what we preach, but really making sure that as a team we're supportive of one another. So I guess at the policy level, those conversations are happening. And so from my point of view, that's something that, you know, I'm kind of looking at. But as far as in regards to the commission, you know, what I would kind of say is you know, as an economic development district, like I kind of said, so many things are thrown at us and we're involved with so many things. Economic development and community development don't have little borders of where they start and end. And so what's economic development and what the needs are is constantly changing. And so for us, it was, I know the hardest thing I think was just starting and to just know, like, you know, I told the commission, I was like, I don't know where to go. I went to the YWCA and I sat down at the executive director's chair in 2014, I think. And I just said, hey, our commission wants to do something on the equity gap. I'm supportive, but I have no idea where to start. This is not, there are no best practices for rural equity inclusion in 2014. And so it's been really exciting to see how this has progressed, but I can still feel that pit in my stomach of, yes, there's a huge challenge in front of us, and as a leader, I have no idea where to even begin. And so I think for me, I don't know if this was your question, but is to just encourage others across the country of just starting somewhere. You might mess up, you might fail, but be brave enough to try and reach out with some of the partners that you know. The It's Time to Talk didn't start and end conversations, but it was a catalyst. And that's what we needed because, again, we're not a nonprofit. We're not a social justice institution. However, we want to thread that through all of the work that we do to be inclusive and thoughtful. So use the tools and the partners that are there, but also be okay to create something that's completely your own. I have other colleagues across Minnesota are doing some really cool things. It's different than what we've done, but we're stealing ideas and bouncing ideas off of each other. And so I guess that's my tangent of be brave enough to try and start somewhere. And the foundations and other partners, it's really, really, it's been really heartwarming and impressive to see how many people have stepped up as we've tried to go into this space and have made so much progress since 2015.
I would like to say, from a small rural community, we generally don't have these resources. So if it would not be all of our big stepping stones, we're outside foundations, Region 9, outside places bringing resources to small rural communities. And so I really feel like the support that we have had it's the local people that have done the work, but without the training, the support, the planning, and the process that we've gotten from many foundations, and particularly most recently from Region 9, we wouldn't be where we are because we wouldn't have those internal things inside like you might have in a metro area. So from a small rural community, the challenge is that we need you to do this because we don't necessarily have access unless larger entities pour into us and provide us with opportunity.
And I would just build off of that too, off of Sue's comment. I challenge and encourage is perhaps the better word, all of my colleagues who run an economic development district across the country is to, you know, start somewhere. You know, you might not be the right partner. I knew that when the challenge got thrown at me, it was like, well, this is something personally I'm very passionate about. But my first response was like, this white Lutheran's not the right person to lead the conversation. But I want it. But we know all the right people. We can make the right connections. And what Region 9 is good at is we're loud. We are a squeaky wheel. We're speaking up for our 72 cities, 9 counties, 147 townships, and 33 school districts. We're the ones that are connected to all the different foundations and to the senators' offices and the members of Congress and things like that. And so I just really encourage the regions, the districts, to really help be that voice, to say what's happening and to not be scared by it, but again, to see it as an opportunity. And hopefully we'll be hearing your story in a year or two from now as well.
Definitely. Thanks to all of you. I wanted to just point out, Pat had posted in the chat, if you didn't see, that there are 2 ways to do this work, imperfectly or not at all. So I super appreciate that response. And I think that that's part of, you know, the takeaways from the today's webinar. I'm trying to see if someone maybe, okay. Sorry, I was confused by the chat for a second. And then in the chat, I know we're going to post it elsewhere, but if you wanted to look at it immediately, that's the Google Doc that has been referred to with all of the many resources that this amazing team has pulled together. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And as mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and I can put you in contact with the team that spoke today. Also, some of their contact information is also on the PowerPoint. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and also really thank the 4 of you, Pat, Sue, Alejandra, and Nicole. Thank you so much again for sharing your story. I really loved hearing it in person in October and I've loved hearing it again. And I know we'll all look forward to hearing more about the great work that you guys are doing, and please keep us posted as it continues. So thanks again to all of you, and I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday.
And thank you to Nato for doing this, to Nato and to your partners. This is a hard space. It's a scary space to jump into sometimes. And so I really appreciate that Nato is fully on board and wants to help spread these best practices.
Thanks, Nicole. We appreciate that. Yeah, and our partners at Engine are doing great work too. So this has been great, and thank you all again, and talk to you soon.